Did Trump go to war for Netanyahu for Israel?
I think largely yes.
So Mehdi Hasan just landed explosive interviews exposing how Trump's Iran war was built on lies and Netanyahu's influence. Congressman Carson from the Intelligence Committee admits he's seen zero evidence justifying the attack. This reveals the disturbing reality behind America's latest Middle East disaster.
Even President Donald Trump's most diehard supporters are struggling to keep up with the White House's messaging on Iran as the administration continues to change the narrative on why they apparently had no choice but to wage war on Iran. Initially, Secretary of State Marco Rubio claimed that the US decided to join Israel's planned attack on Tehran as a, quote, preemptive measure, out of fear that Iran would retaliate by attacking US forces. But later Trump directly contradicted Rubio, suggesting it was he who, quote, forced Israel's hand and claiming that Iran would have attacked first if the US didn't take action. Regardless of the exact story, the question remains, was this really a preemptive strike?
These shifting narratives mirror exactly what we saw before the Iraq War. Administration officials telling different stories because they're making up justifications after the fact. When your own Secretary of State contradicts the president on war rationale, that's not strategy, that's improvisation with American lives.
Is there any evidence that Iran posed a serious or imminent threat to US security? Or is Trump just trying to distract from a failed domestic agenda and an administration embroiled by the EPSTEIN files?
The Constitution requires imminent threat for unilateral military action. Carson's about to reveal that Intelligence Committee members have seen zero evidence meeting that standard. Meanwhile, those Epstein files drop the same week as the Iran strike. Suspicious timing doesn't begin to cover it.
You are on the Intel Committee. Is that the intel you've seen?
I've not seen any intelligence that would satisfy that kind of attack.
This is massive. Carson sits on the House Intelligence Committee. He sees the classified briefings, the real intel. When he says there's no evidence justifying this attack, that means Trump launched a war without meeting basic constitutional requirements. Iraq WMD lies all over again.
This was clearly an attack to distract us from the Epstein files. And what is clear to me is that this is a hegemonic attempt for Donald Trump to put his footprint in the region, not only in the Middle East, but in the global South. We've seen what has happened with Maduro. We've now seen what happened in Ecuador. And now Donald Trump is trying to show the global community that he has the big stick, all in an attempt to establish a very shaky legacy, a very questionable legacy, and take us away from his failings here.
Carson nails it. The Epstein files timing is no coincidence. Trump has a pattern. When domestic scandals heat up, start bombing. The human cost of using war as political theater is staggering, but that calculation apparently doesn't factor into Trump's damage control playbook.
I've not seen any evidence that would satisfy an attack. I think that the Netanyahu administration has been very persuasive over Donald Trump. Donald Trump has an issue. He projects himself to be very decisive and a very clear leader, but it's clear that he's most influenced by the last person he speaks to.
Carson's psychological assessment here is devastating, but accurate. Trump's last person he spoke to decision-making is documented going back years. When that person is Netanyahu pushing for regional war, American foreign policy becomes Israeli foreign policy by proxy. Exactly what happened here.
And that's the kind of leadership that troubles me. He's a masterful marketeer, but as a leader, he doesn't have the constitution and the resolve to convince generals, let alone the American people, that he's our commander-in-chief.
Coming from someone who works directly with military leadership on the Intelligence Committee, this assessment carries serious weight. Carson's basically saying Trump lacks the fundamental qualities needed to command America's armed forces. A sitting congressman questioning the commander-in-chief's basic competence.
That last person on the Middle East tends to be Benjamin Netanyahu. Multiple meetings in the Oval Office, more trips to the White House than any other leader I can think of since Trump came to power. Did Trump go to war for Netanyahu for Israel?
The data backs this up. Netanyahu visited Trump more than any foreign leader during his presidency. That unprecedented access translated directly into policy wins for Israel at America's expense. Carson's confirming what many suspected. Trump went to war for Netanyahu, not American interests.
This presidency, this State Department has abandoned thousands of Americans in the Middle East.
Daily, I'm hearing from Americans who are stationed overseas. I'm hearing from friends who are in Qatar. I'm the co-chair of the Qatari caucus. They've been a big ally. They are deeply concerned. They can't afford the cost, the hotel costs, and extending their stay there.
Remember how Republicans screamed about 4 Americans in Benghazi for years? Now thousands are abandoned across the Middle East and crickets from the GOP. Carson's highlighting the breathtaking hypocrisy. American lives only matter when they can be weaponized against Democrats, apparently.
Lives of Americans abroad are at risk. And now, because of retaliatory threats, we could see attacks on our homeland by folks with terrorist organizations seeking to seize upon the moment, as it were, or sleeper cell operations as well.
Carson's warning about homeland attacks echoes exactly what intelligence agencies predicted before Iraq, that killing Iranian leaders would radicalize millions against America. Khamenei's death has already triggered massive anti-American sentiment. The blowback Carson fears is coming whether we prepare or not.
But I'm old enough to remember the Iraq War when the intelligence agencies told Bush and Blair that if you attack Iraq, you will only embolden al-Qaeda. It'll be a recruiting sergeant for jihadist groups throughout the Middle East. There'll be attacks on the US and UK. And that's exactly what happened. The UK suffered the 7/7 attacks in 2005. We saw the creation of ISIS as a direct result of the Iraq invasion.
The Iraq parallel is perfect and terrifying. Intelligence warned Bush that invasion would create more terrorists. They ignored it. Got ISIS. Now intelligence warns Trump about Iran blowback. He ignored it too. Carson and others are sounding every alarm, but this administration learned nothing from history.
You don't hear it in D.C., but I'm most concerned about Iranian Americans who obviously face retribution from the ignorant part of our communities. They've made great contributions. I have childhood friends from that community. But even more so, I'm hearing from local folks. We have the largest single sporting day event in the entire world, the Indy 500. We got to get you there. I'm concerned about major sporting events that could be used in a symbolic attack to say, hey, we won't let this slide in this forever war. And so as someone who comes from Homeland Security, comes from law enforcement, comes from the city council, but sits on the intelligence committee, I lose sleep over a domestic attack every day.
Carson brings unique credibility here. Law enforcement background, Homeland Security experience, intelligence committee access. When someone with his qualifications says he loses sleep over domestic attacks, every American should pay attention. His sleepless nights should be keeping all of us awake.
Do you believe Donald Trump has endangered American lives at home?
Without question.
No hedging, no diplomatic language, just a direct, without question from a sitting congressman. Carson's basically accusing the president of recklessly endangering American lives for political gain. That's not partisan rhetoric, that's a devastating indictment from someone with access to classified intelligence.
He's endangered American lives since he took office, not only in 2016, but very recently, over a year ago. And so what he is doing is actually outside of the vision of the founding fathers who he purports to model himself after. They had a vision of 3 separate but very equal branches of government to act as a check on the other. What he's doing is presidential excess and overreach, and Congress has to keep him in check.
Carson's framing this as fundamental constitutional crisis. Exactly right. The founders designed checks and balances specifically to prevent kings from unilateral war making. Trump's claiming dictatorial powers while wrapping himself in constitutional rhetoric. Pure authoritarianism disguised as patriotism.
Barack Obama attacked Libya, and there was no war powers vote. There was no congressional authorization for that. Why the double standard?
Well, many Democrats were critical back then. I mean, obviously there's a 60-day window. And after that 60 days, the president has, I believe, 30 days to get troops back home.
But the 60 days is based on an imminent threat, which Iran does not pose right now. And Libya did not pose to the US in 2011.
That is correct. That doesn't make it right.
Carson's intellectual honesty here is refreshing. Admitting Obama's Libya action was also constitutionally questionable. That moral consistency strengthens his credibility on Trump's Iran war. When someone criticizes their own party's overreach, their condemnation of the other side carries real weight.
He presented himself as an anti-war candidate, as you know, in 2024.
Sure.
You know that a lot of Muslim Americans, Arab Americans, voted for Trump. Like 1 in 4, 1 in 3, depending on which poll you look at.
Toes, brother.
You know this. We had these conversations, you and I, back in 2024.
No doubt. Yeah.
He went to places like Michigan and got big crowds of people cheering him in Dearborn. Yes, and then this is the guy who has attacked multiple Muslim-majority countries, Yemen, Iraq, Somalia, Afghanistan, and now Iran. He's done what no American president, not even George W. Bush, has done.
Sure.
Do you think some of those voters, anti-war voters, even even the MAGA voters, not just the Muslim ones, have buyer's remorse?
The betrayal is staggering. Trump literally campaigned as the peace candidate, got Arab and Muslim American votes on that promise, then immediately launched the most aggressive bombing campaign in modern history. He's attacked more Muslim-majority countries than Bush ever did. Complete bad faith.
But with our community specifically, we knew what we were getting into because Donald Trump introduced the Muslim ban in his first term.
Yeah, and bombed a bunch of countries in his first term.
Absolutely. And so,
but I guess the argument is that the Democrats allowed him to play the anti-war card because Kamala Harris didn't run on an anti-war card. Kamala Harris said Iran is our greatest adversary, she said in 20. Now she's come out with a very strong statement recently.
Carson's analysis exposes the Democratic messaging failure perfectly. Harris talking about lethal military and calling Iran our greatest adversary gave Trump space to pose as the peace candidate. When Democrats sound hawkish, Trump can successfully masquerade as the anti-war option. Brilliant political malpractice.
Recently he said, if they forced us to choose, the choice between dogs and Muslims is not a difficult one. He's not been censured, let alone suspended from the House. What is going on? Why has there been no action taken?
He and I have been at war on X regularly. I condemn that kind of bigotry. I condemn that kind of racism and xenophobia. And it's the kind of racism and xenophobia that undermines the credibility of the Republican Party to let that kind of member of Congress stand, get support without any retribution or punishment.
Fine's dogs versus Muslims comment is Nazi-level dehumanization, and GOP leadership's silence is deafening. Carson's outrage is completely justified. Imagine if a Democrat said this about Christians or Jews. The double standard on anti-Muslim bigotry is a stain on American religious freedom.
We can't let that kind of activity slide. I mean, what has happened in Gaza is a clear genocide. We have to say it and have to be unapologetic about saying it. And members of Congress who want to tout that kind of vitriolic language should be punished and rebuked publicly.
Carson shows real moral courage here, calling Gaza a genocide while his own party leadership stays silent. The fact that opposing genocide requires being unapologetic shows how far American political discourse has fallen. Carson standing up when it costs him politically. That's actual leadership.